This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, this week we're back with another one of our poll episodes. This is where we take the results of a poll and turn them into an episode that we review the record.
Well, let me walk you through it for those who don't know. So if you go to our website, digmeoutpodcast.com, you'll find a suggest an album form. We take all those suggestions, take 8 at a time in the order we get them, put them up on Patreon, and let the patrons vote and see what they want us to review.
And Jay, speaking of Patreon, we had 3 new patrons join us in the last week.
That's awesome.
Dan Goodspeed, Rick Leiter, and Sean. No last name, just a singular Sean, like Prince or Madonna. Welcome, all of you. And you know, we had some in the last episode that we mentioned. And thanks to everyone who has joined us recently. I don't know if it's just our wit and our charm, or the promise of a radio station, perhaps, or what it is. But we appreciate the support, and we're helping grow this thing, and maybe we'll launch that radio station full time at some point. Yeah,
if we can get to 500 a month on Patreon, that would fund what we need to get the license to do sound scan and pay the artists we play and get this thing going. So
right,
that's doable.
Right.
I mean, that's like, you know, a small portion of our audience. If they put it up $1 a month, we would have a radio station.
The what we just did with the radio station was basically a test. You know, I mean, we're going to, of course, tally up the number of plays and the number of listeners, and we're going to take a penny and divide it up accordingly to all the artists, because royalty rates are pretty crap, but we got to adhere to what the rules are. I mean, we could splurge and send everybody a full penny. But you know, we got to check the budget. I got to talk to the accountant about that before we do that.
No, but we got some good feedback. It was fun to do, and hopefully it gave people a little better idea of what Dayton sounded like in the 90s.
Yes.
I'm looking at the poll we're running right now. This will be done by the time podcast comes out, but just to give you an idea, we've got a two-way top. Well, we've got 4 albums: Johnny Polonsky, Garageland, Owsley, and Life of Agony, that are all within a vote of each other. So
your vote can make the difference.
Definitely. You could come in, and right before this closes, you could you close the deal.
Folks, I don't want to speak lightly, but it's kind of important to vote.
Yeah. I've heard of this. I've heard a lot of people complain, and then actually solutions are sometimes very easy. It just means you have to like get up and go vote, and then and then all of a sudden things start happening.
Right, exactly. So our last poll, which generated the episode that we're doing this time, was for September. And there were a bunch of records that were in that poll that I'm going to mention right now. The ones that didn't do so well, only got 3% of the vote, were Compound Red's album Always a Pleasure, Curb Dog's Dry Riser, and Best Kissers in the World, Been There. A little bit better was Colorfinger's In the Heart of the Beast in the Sun. That was at 10%. And then at 13%, tie was Shades Apart, Eyewitness, and Neutral Milk Hotels in an Aeroplane Over the Sea. Coming in second place, Jay, was Edna Swamp with Wonderland Park. That had 19%. But the winner, the crushing, undisputed winner, was Built to Spill's Keep It Like a Secret with 35% of the vote. I was surprised because, like previous polls, Jay, the comments did not reflect the voting.
Yep.
There was only like 2 people who said, yeah, you should probably do Built to Spill. And one of them was like kind of a backhanded, like Scott Holgram said, Built to Spill and Neutral Hotel are both pretty big holes in what you've covered over the years, which I kind of felt like, hey, wait a minute. We're doing our best here, Scott. We're trying to do every record that's ever existed in the 90s, but it's going to take us a while. So,
yeah, we have some significant holes. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of music to cover here. So, but there was a lot of love for, I thought Shades Apart got a lot of Facebook comments.
Yes. Brandon Trammell mentioned
hardly any votes.
Yep. Who else mentioned a couple people? Whitney Bueller also. He said I'm with Brandon. Eyewitness was viewed as a sellout by fans of the band, but hey, Shades Apart probably needed to sell more than 12 CDs. The album is well produced and the songs are catchy and punchy.
Yeah.
Keith Sawyer threw his vote to Shades Apart. Matthew Barnes said I'm really rooting for Edna Swamp on this one. If it doesn't win, you should really check it out. Anne's voice is beautiful, sultry, angsty, vulnerable, and her melodies are so catchy. It's a damn travesty this record isn't huge. The music is heavy and trippy. The production is spot on. Kelly Scott and Ken Andrews have a hand in here, and they're in some drum and production work, respectively. I did not know that, Jay, that Kelly Scott played drums and Ken Andrews produced on that record. It's interesting.
Which record?
Edna Swamp. That's what Matthew Barnes says.
No kidding. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either.
Is this before or after that hit song that they wrote that
Torn, Nelly Imbruglia?
Yeah.
I don't know. He also mentioned for Wonderland. Well, that was Wonderland Park was Edna Swamp. Phil Fleming also went with Edna Swamp. And Scott Witt said, I choose Best Kissers for the album art alone. It's just a picture of a messy bed. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And then Johnny Hooper, he was one that said, sorry, folks, it simply has to be Keep It Like a Secret. We're talking about one of the strongest rock records of the 90s, performed by one of alternative rock's finest guitarists. What's scary is that Secret is only their second best album. Perfect from Now On certainly lives up to the name. So there you go. Wasn't a whole lot of love for Built to Spill, yet the silent majority won, Jay.
The underdog.
The underdog. It crept in.
I was beginning to fear that the most known album was always going to win. We'll see how this one pans out, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, that's interesting because I think in terms of mainstream, like if you were to walk down the street,
yeah,
I think Built to Spill might be the one name that actually triggers like, oh yeah, I know what that. I've heard of that band.
Right.
But I think in terms of like music fandom,
yeah,
Neutral Milk Hotel has a more legendary status.
Yep.
So, and all these records are interesting in their own way, and we've done a Curb Doll record before, and we know that we like them. So, Jay, so let me ask you: have you ever listened to much Built to Spill?
I have. I went through a little phase. I don't have this record, but I had a different record. Let me see what it is.
Ancient Melodies of the Future, or your more recent stuff like There Is No Enemy, or
You in Reverse is the record.
You in Reverse, okay.
I think it's one of those bands that I probably should listen to more, but for whatever reason I don't. I generally like them. I recognize the songs. Had a record, enjoyed it. For whatever reason, I don't go back to them often. Not sure why, but they just kind of don't pop into my mind of, hey, I should go check that out, or miss hearing that record.
I did not get into Built to Spill until the early 2000s. It was actually on the follow-up record to this, which I mentioned is Ancient Melodies of the Future. It came out in 2001. And it's funny because like they were playing a single off that record on CD 101, which is now a CD 102.5. I believe it was Strange was the single. And I remember people being like, ugh, what happened to Built to Spill? And I was like, I kind of like this. I don't know what you're complaining about. And then I went back and listened to the earlier stuff, like Perfect from Now On and Keep It Like a Secret. I was like, okay, I can understand if you were really into that you would not, maybe you'd be like disappointed. And we'll get into why. But
Yeah.
I have not really gone past that record. I've probably sampled You in Reverse, There Is No Enemy, Untethered Moon, like on Spotify, but I haven't really gotten deep into those records or the early stuff. I know like Big Dipper because that song got played again, like on college radio a lot, and I've actually seen bands cover it as well. So I have a little bit of familiarity with the band and this record and the previous record and the one after it, but that's about it.
Yep.
So just so people are aware of the history of this band, they're from Boise, Idaho, formed in 1992. They are still active. They have gone through a shifting lineup of the same people. When Doug Martsch, who was previously in a band called Tree People, formed Built to Spill, he basically formed it himself, and he said like every album was going to have a different lineup, which is kind of true. They've kind of had different lineups, but it's been like the same 4 or 5 or 6 people that have like rotated in and out based on what they were available because they're doing other bands. So like the original lineup was Brett Netson and Ralph Utes, and then like Utes left the band and he was replaced by Brett Nelson. So at one point there was a Brett Netson and a Brett Nelson in the band at the same time. And then Andy Capps was the drummer for a while, and then he passed away actually in the early 2000s. And then more recently, on the recent records, it's been Steve Gear and Jason Albertini have been the rhythm section. And what's interesting is like if you look at the like credits on the records, it's usually just Doug Martsch credited with all the guitar stuff. But when they tour, they sometimes tour with up to 3 guitar players, because he basically plays everything on the record, which there's multiple tracks, and then to play that live, he gets the guys who aren't necessarily in the band full time return to the band and play. So it's sort of this weird rotating lineup of a group of friends who move in and out of the band as they're available. And they've been on a major label for quite a lot of this. They started out on CZ Records, and then they were on Up Records, and then they were on Warner Brothers from 1997 to 2015, which is pretty amazing that they were able to stay on a major label for, what is that, 18 years?
Mm. Yeah.
But I guess the deal is that basically it was Doug Martsch who signed as I don't know if there's a name for that when it's just like one member of the band, but it's under a band name. It's a key man or something like that. And he like got written into the contract that he had like very strong creative control over like the mix and the all aspects of the band essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So Warner Brothers just kind of left him alone to like do whatever he wanted, and they have put out a record pretty consistently, like 97 on 99, 2001, 2006, 2009, 2015. There was a couple years where they were a little shaky because he had like a detached retina and they missed some time, and then they like had a recording session, like had a bunch of stuff, and then scrapped it all. And
well, honestly, I mean, if a record label is smart, they would be a dream. Like to have a couple of them on your roster is probably easy money. Like not like they're putting a ton of promotion in them. They've got a built out fan base. They probably don't spend a ton of money.
They just tour a lot
recording.
Yeah.
So it's small investment and you're probably guaranteed the same return every time because the fan base is so strong.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense. I guess I don't give record labels that much credit anymore, at least not the big ones, to be able to piece that together of like, hey, maybe if you just like got out of the fucking way and let them do their job, and you'd actually make some money.
Right. I will say that after Untethered Moon, Doug Martsch triggered whatever was in his contract so that they could leave Warner Brothers. So that was last year actually, and they took over their website from Warner Brothers, so they have builttospill.com. So let's get into the record. Who was the person who suggested this record, by the way, Jay? Do you have that on hand? The name of the suggestor who provided this record in our suggestion pile, so to speak?
I could if you could stall a little bit longer.
I'm trying to stall as much as possible, Jay. That's why I'm going on at length with my introduction of the person who suggested this record for our listeners and that we put into the poll that everyone voted on in September. So, Jay.
Oh, I'm so close.
Now that I have stalled for a significant amount of time, can you tell us who that person was?
Oh, so close. Paul Wogan.
Paul.
Paul
Thanks,
Wogan.
Paul. Thanks,
Wogan.
That was a hell of amount of stalling.
I got an old computer, man. It took a couple minutes to load all that up.
Apple IIe over there? Jeez.
I upgraded from I had a 10-year-old Mac Pro. I finally let go of that, which was very emotional this weekend.
Oh my God.
And I upgraded to a 8-year-old Mac Mini. So
what are you doing down there?
I know.
Get some.
I got a
MacBook.
MacBook
Working with
too
haptic gloves in a 3-dimensional like. It should look like Minority Report down there. You should have.
Mac desktop computers are super expensive now.
Yeah. I know. I hear you. All right.
I'm that old man now. I don't want to give up on what I like.
I know. Keep It Like a Secret, Jay. Came out in 1999. Tell me one thing you liked about it.
Well, I think what's different about this band is how they go back and forth between classic rock kind of approaches and then being almost stereotypically 90s indie rock. And I think there's a pretty cool contrast between the two. So at times you're like, oh, well, he kind of sounds like Neil Young. And then other times I'm thinking, oh, God, this sounds exactly like Modest Mouse. Like, I wouldn't know the difference between this and Modest Mouse. Or there's other times where they get quiet. I'm like, this sounds exactly like Death Cab for Cutie, at least the early stuff. But then there's these just elaborate guitar parts and sections that are just a full 12-course meal of guitar. Like,
yep.
Guitar on top of guitar on top of guitar on top of bass that sounds like guitar on top of keyboards that sound like guitars or guitars that sound like keyboards. So, I think it walks this line that can be at sometimes very familiar and then other times very different and creative. A lot of the guitar work, obviously, I like. It's, the approach, the technique. There's some really cool picking on here. There's some really cool bend styles. There's some like nice use of effects. So, and then just really creative layering. It's definitely a full listen. It takes you. I think you get pulled in enough by the hooks and sort of the strong structures for it to make sense at first. So it's not. I wouldn't say it's necessarily difficult, but it certainly gives more the more you listen to it, just because there's so many layers. And also, like, if you change up what you're listening, change your headphones, listen on speakers, listen to your car, you're just going to hear different things because there's just so much here to discover.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, quite a bit to take in, but I think the net of it for me is just that interesting line that it walks between, being fairly typical 90s indie alt rock and then mixing in this really quirky kind of take on classic rock, whether it be you hear some Beatles, you hear some Neil Young. I even heard some Steve Miller Band, to be honest with you. So just a really cool space to be between those two worlds.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. And I say the one thing that really stuck out to me, I've owned these records for a while. Not when they came out, but I owned this and Perfect From Now On for a while. And the thing that has always stood out for me, especially on this record, is the song construction. Although they are often working with a sort of verse, chorus, verse format, the way that they get there and the way that they phrase verses in terms of they're not standard 4 chords. I mean, there are like really intricate picking parts that are weaving in your left and right channels. There's weird things going on. There might be a guitar that then shows up right down the center. So you have 3 guitars going, playing different parts, but they're all like kind of working together because it's all Doug Martsch, like, overdubbing himself. But they do so many cool, just inventive ways of constructing. You take the first song, The Plan.
Like it's always
it's built around this like crescendo and collapse, and it's really interesting because then it really like you hear all the instruments. So like when it's collapsing, the bass line is sort of carrying the song, and then there's these interludes of like guitars playing back and forth off of each other, and there's these dramatic builds, and it's just fascinating. But there's really like at the core of it is a very simple sort of song structure. He just has his, like you said, this classic rock, very Neil Young, Crazy Horse approach to a lot of this. And the record before this is way more intricate. I've read where he said like he purposely like toned it down on this record and got away from like multiple 7-8 minute long songs. There's still Broken Chairs is 8:40, but the rest of the record is actually fairly concise. I mean, they're between like Center of the Universe is only 2:43. The rest of the records are in the 3 to 5.5 minute range. But I just love that he eschews like playing these standard sort of like bar chord, power chord riffs that you associate with like a lot of 90s indie rock, and it's just a constant deluge of like riffs and leads and really cool effects, like on Time Trap. Like first of all, I love the intro to that song. That sounds like classic Crazy Horse jamming to begin that song, and then it like breaks down and you get that really weird like Doctor Who lead guitar going on in that song. I don't know how else to describe it. That's what it reminded me of, like the Doctor Who theme. There's just tons of that stuff. This is like a guitar nerd's dream to like listen to this record and hear the way that they integrate so much guitar work into that are really like the driving melodic force of the whole record is the guitar stuff. In another band you would have a singer doing a lot of the stuff in terms of counter melodies, but he's doing it on guitar.
Yeah. There's some good background vocals too that help support it, and there's some. I don't know if they're. It's hard to tell. Like the Plan has a very distinct, important bass line, but then sometimes when I listen to, I'm pretty sure that's bass, but other times I listen to certain parts like that, and I'm like questioning if it's a bass or not. It's a low end guitar, or it could be bass played high. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but there are bass-like parts that are fairly significant when it comes to carrying the melodic aspect of the song that maybe the vocal isn't focused on, and the guitars are just so crazy that the bass does hold it together melodically.
And I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing Doug Martsch as far as being like that his vocals not carrying it, like for as kind of limited he is as a vocalist. I think he really does a good job of like punctuating where he needs to. Like Carry the Zero is a good example. That song is really built around like sort of an instrumental and then a verse and then an instrumental and a verse, and then there's like a chorus that comes in like way late into the song. But then he does this thing probably about almost to the end of the song. Well, there's a lot of jamming at the end of the song, but like almost to like the 4-minute mark of the song, where he like the verses or his vocal is kind of measured. He doesn't get on top of himself too much. And then he like kind of, when he gets to the certain point towards the 4-minute mark into the song, the vocal almost like doubles in time in terms of its intensity. Not in the way that he's still singing in his sort of like airy higher register.
Mm-hmm.
But he just like the urgency of his singing increases, and it like perfectly segues into the build of the outro of the song. And I think like a lesser sort of more, there's a lot of indie rock bands that would do this sort of sound, but that could not pull off that sort of cathartic release with the vocal the way that he does. There are a lot of very capable guitarists in 90s indie rock bands who just never had the chops to pull off like a good vocal, but they were really good at noodling and coming up with awesome guitar leads and stuff like that. Like I think Polvo is a good example. Amazing guitar work in that band. I can't remember a single line of lyric or melody from that band, but I like tons of amazing riffs, but just nothing stuck with me as far as vocals or anything like that. And there are a lot of bands like that, and I think that's what really separates Doug Martsch, is like he's able to find where to use his voice and then how to like really connect when he needs to, that in a ways that a lot of other ones don't. I think your Modest Mouse comparison is on point. Modest Mouse, I think, got a little more abrasive in their earlier years. I think they sort of flattened out in terms of like getting rid of the aggressive stuff when they somehow managed to score that like ridiculous massive single in the mid 2000s.
Yep.
But I never really thought of them as a contemporary, but that's probably, I mean, they're both from out west, so that's probably not an unfair comparison. Or is Death Cab. There's definitely a lot of earlier Death Cab sound in this band. I would not be surprised if they played early shows together.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what kind of gets me maybe to what I don't like about the record. It sounds very 90s to me, significant portions of it. I think the unique, I guess, almost overindulgence of guitar is what makes it stand out from a lot of other similar sounding music from the time. But then some of the guitars, I mean, some of the stuff is just, it's over the top. Like it's hard to really focus on anything. He's somehow able to pull it off most of the time, but it also just made me wonder, like, what would it sound like if it was just a little bit simpler,
Well, he has a solo record you can check out if you want.
Okay. Instead of 12 guitar parts, what if there was just like 3?
Right.
Like, what would he focus on and how would that come across? And, I don't know. Maybe that's not the point of the band. But boy, it gets over the top sometimes.
It does. I think that may be the point. It's
Yeah.
just good. I think of it in terms of like, he's almost like the West Coast version of, not that Boise's on the coast, but the Western version of like Jay Mascis in terms of 90s indie rock. Just,
True.
Just letting the guitar shred. But he's not a soloer in the same way that like, with that, like, Jay Mascis definitely had his metal background.
Yeah, there's not a ton of like heavy overdrive on this record. I mean, it gets just,
Right. It gets fuzzy at certain points.
Yeah, it gets big and fuzzy, but yeah, it's not like, I mean, Jay Mascis will do solos that are heavily distorted and feedbacky and screaming.
What did you think of track 8, You Were Right? I feel like we've discussed this song before, but I can't remember.
Well, I remember the song.
Okay.
I mean, I remember this song and I remember the plan. I don't know why, but definitely, had heard them quite a bit. It's a little novelty to me.
Right. I think I disliked it when I originally heard it because I thought that.
Yeah.
And now I think it's kind of, we put it this way. I think it's ballsier now that he did it, knowing that this is a band that has like a certain like indie rock pedigree, and to be so like tongue in cheek is something that was not really cool in the 90s. Like this is almost like a Ben Folds move. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for him to do it is like almost like punk rock. Like him to be like, I'm gonna make a stupid song that has like quotes a whole bunch of classic rock lyrics.
Yeah, I guess that's what part of me is like, oh, that's really clever. I like how he's doing that, and there's a little nostalgia there and whatever. But then I'm like, I guess I don't want it to be ironic. If it's genuine, I think it means more to me.
Right.
Well, so I think at the time I didn't know how to take it.
I did read that what he said was he wrote the chorus first. He was like, messing around. He came up with the chorus. And he's like, well, what would the opposite be for the verse? So he started like thinking about, if you were right, what would you be wrong about? And he basically did it as a way to like sort of poke a little fun, I guess, at all the classic rock, that he had grown up on.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely like a conscious, like I'm doing this specific thing for this reason, instead of like just stringing together a bunch of. He basically wanted to like find these cliches and like sort of like tear them, be a little pessimistic about like, oh well. I think also there was a bit of 70s nostalgia in the 90s. We've talked about that before. Yep. And so this is a way to like kind of push back against that. Well, you were wrong.
Yeah.
So I kind of dig it. I mean, he put it at the end of the record, so it's not like he stuck it up at the front. I think it got played as like a single.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely had heard it. So, and I'm sure, I don't know, at some point I probably listened to this record. Right. I just don't remember, but that one in the plan, definitely I remember. There were a couple others that were very familiar.
Yeah, I don't have I really enjoy the record. I don't have a lot of like negative, I guess there's a couple overly long tracks, but they're towards the end and it doesn't bother me that much. It's actually a fairly concise record for being a 90s record. It's about 47 minutes.
Yes. Yep. No complaints there.
And actually the record before this is 8 songs, but there's not a song like under 5 minutes. Like they're all in like 6, 7, 8 minute range. So that's a very like 70s Neil Young Crazy Horse record. Yeah. There. I mean, I have a Neil Young record that starts out with like 2 20-minute long or 10-minute long songs or something like that.
Jesus.
That's not uncommon.
Yep.
So I don't have a whole lot of like bad things to say. I know this record has been talked up by a lot of people. Even All Music, which we often disagree with, gave it a positive review. And it was weird. The one thing that I read that was like a negative review was from Q Magazine when it came out. Wrote, they sound like they're trying too hard, and that the Flaming Lips and Mercury Rev do this sort of thing with far more panache.
Yeah.
I don't think either of those bands are in this space, though. That's like that. Those are much more like psychedelic sounding, and
yeah. I mean, that's I agree. I don't. Yeah. I know the difference, but I can, when I listen to this, if you're not giving it as much attention as we are,
right?
I could see how you could write this off as like, oh, this is a late 90s indie rock band. Like,
sure.
So I think that's part of where my criticism comes from the record. I mean, I still think it's a very, I'm going to give it a worthy record. Spoiler alert. But there is a little bit of a date on this for me, and I can see how some people would write it off in the way that you just described.
That's a good point. I mean, I do think, while I do enjoy listening to this record, I would imagine someone who's younger now trying to listen to this would be put off by how, unless they're like really into guitars,
Yeah.
they would probably have a hard time digesting this because it is so intricate, and not in like a Steve Vai kind of way, but just like that was a thing to like write, these like really interesting guitar parts.
Well,
I wonder how like a Minus the Bear would go over with, they have so many songs that have like a lot of intricate guitar parts, especially the earlier stuff that's not as, some of the stuff is more rhythmic oriented towards the latter half, but there are a lot of songs, a lot of bands. It seems like
music has become, at least pop music has become, not layered at all. Like very simple.
Well, the layering and the percussion.
Yeah. But even like there's a lot of like popular rock music that's, distorted bass, because it's like you don't even want to have two guitars because that would be too layered.
I have a theory on that. I've noticed a lot of recent like pop music or stuff that's getting played on like I mentioned, like CD 101 or 102.5 here in Columbus.
Yep.
The vocals are often distorted.
Okay.
Like I've heard this song El King, or artist El King, who has a song called Shame.
Okay.
Like they're playing the crap out of it, and it's got this very like Amy Winehouse kind of feel, like that kind of vibe. And her vocals are distorted, and I've noticed a lot of bands having distorted vocals. My theory is that people listen through like earbuds and that distortion sounds okay. Like it that's what that sounds like.
Yep.
So you want like a tinny distorted vocal so that it works well within the earbud.
Yep.
And then you distort the bass, because otherwise the bass is going to be completely lost in that format.
And then you don't need guitars, so you can make it sound like full and heavy, but you don't actually have to have guitars in it.
Right.
So it's like super simple. Like you can get away with a very simple melody focused mix if you've got a beefy, meaty bass. Yeah, and that vocal that's cutting through. Then also it makes it easier to mix the vocal because the guitars aren't competing with it.
Yep.
Just it's a formula that I'm with you. I'm noticing it's used more and more, and I think part of it is what you said, like just the shitty headphones that people listen to music on now. It's like being mixed for that, and then there's just layered guitars are kind of, it's becoming like too much for people, I guess. I don't know, So yeah, I could see this band now for most people being way too hard to deal with. And it's funny because there's, vocally and like from a volume standpoint, there's not anything offensive about it. In fact, it's, pretty mellow, but just the amount of layers, I think I could see people like getting lost in.
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree with you. This is a worthy record. I do agree that it's very stamped in terms of its performance. I don't think necessarily the mix or anything. It's a very sort of neutral mix, but it's just in terms of what the sound is definitely sounds like late 90s, early 2000s indie rock. And it's not a bad thing. It just transports you to a space that is very specific and will never happen again, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's our revisitation.
Is it a worthy album for you?
It is a worthy album. Yeah. This and Perfect From Now On, I think, are the highlights of their catalog for me, and in terms of this style of intricate guitar work, I think this is sort of the height. I know there were a lot of bands that were doing this, but like I said, I don't think as many of them were as successful as crafting vocal hooks and melodies and memorable, interesting lyrical components is the way that Doug Martsch does. So that's where I think this band excels. This album is a little tighter than the previous one, but they're both like really, really strong records. So I don't have a complaint. I do need to like revisit all that 2000 stuff because I just have not given it a strong enough chance.
Yep.
So, but worthy record, definitely.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have any stinkers on it. I mean, you heard my criticisms of it. I think, like you said, the production is really good. It's not dated on that end. I just think you have to really love guitars like we do to get to appreciate this record.
Right. No, if you're not into guitars, don't bother.
Yeah.
Want to thank everybody who commented over at Patreon and who voted. That's patreon.com/digmeout. You can join us there for as little as $1 a month, and you get to vote in polls every month that we will be putting up, as well as get bonus content for episodes like when we do roundtables or what have you, when we feel like doing some bonus content or have the time, I should say. And then, of course, we're going to have a fourth quarter. We just did our third quarter giveaway. We're going to have a fourth quarter giveaway for the end of the year. We'll come up with something big and nice and interesting and fun for that. And if you like what you heard, please consider leaving us some positive feedback over at iTunes. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
Thanks for listening. To support the podcast, visit www.patreon.com/digmeout and become a monthly subscriber at www.digmeoutpodcast.com, where you can find links to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, as well as our merchandise store at Zazzle.com.